We had only been in our new house for a month when my son Sam first mentioned it. He was playing in the backyard with his twin sister Robbie when he casually said, "Dad, why does the man next door always watch us?" I had just finished unpacking the last of the box and was finally able to sit down and enjoy a moment of peace. My wife, Carol, was busy setting up the kitchen, and the kids were frolicking in their new inflatable pool. The sun was blazing, and the backyard was filled with their happy squeals. But as I heard Sam's question, chill ran down my spine. Our old house, a corner property with a huge backyard, had been the scene of something so disturbing that we'd been forced to move. But I wasn't prepared for history to repeat itself so soon. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sam looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "The man next door, he's always staring at us, and sometimes he has a shiny thing that flashes." I took a deep breath. The old house had been a nightmare of unwanted glances and unsettling occurrences, but I was determined to put it behind us. I glanced at our new neighbor's house, a modest two-story with overgrown hedges obscuring most of it. I hadn't seen much of the man next door, whose name was Steve, but I knew he had moved in only a few months before us. Later that evening, as Carol and I were preparing dinner, the kids went outside to play again. It was a hot, sticky summer day, perfect for cooling off in the blow-up pool. Their laughter echoed through the yard, but then it fell silent. Robbie came running inside, face ashen. "Dad, there was a flash from the neighbor's window," he said, her voice trembling. "It was really bright, like a camera flash." I frowned, trying to stay calm. "Are you sure it wasn't just a reflection or something?" Robbie shook her head vigorously. "No, it was a flash, like someone was taking a picture of us." Carol's face turned pale as she overheard the conversation. "You should go over there and check it out. See if Steve's home and ask him about it." I nodded, though my gut was telling me something was wrong. I walked next door and rang the doorbell, but after a few attempts, Steve didn't answer. His car was parked in the driveway, so he had to be home. I knocked a few more times and even tried calling out to him, but there was no response. When I returned to Carol, I told her what had happened. He wasn't home, but the kids are sure they saw something. Carol looked worried. "We need to keep an eye on this. It could be nothing, but with what happened at the old house." A few weeks passed, and the unsettling feeling didn't fade. One night, as Carol and I were drifting off to sleep, I heard a noise outside, something soft and barely perceptible. Carol was already half asleep, but I gently shook her awake. "Did you hear that?" I asked, straining to listen. Carol frowned. "I don't hear anything." I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to the backyard. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I turned on the outdoor lights and scanned the yard, found nothing out of the ordinary. The lights from Steve's house were on, though, and I noticed something strange. I walked over to the fence and peered into Steve's backyard. He suddenly appeared on the other side of the fence, startling me. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice gruff. "I heard something outside. Have you seen or heard anyone sneaking around?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Steve shook his head. "No, I haven't seen or heard anything. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, but decided to ask directly. "Kids thought they saw a flash coming from one of your windows. Is there a reason for that?" Steve's reaction was immediate and intense. He seemed genuinely offended, face reddening. "How dare you accuse me of that? I have nothing to do with your kids." I tried to defuse the situation, apologizing and retreating back to my house. Carol was livid when I told her. "He's hiding something. I know it. He's up to something." Despite our growing concerns, we couldn't prove anything. Life went on, but the discomfort never left. Then, one night, everything changed. I was jolted awake by Carol shaking me urgently. "Ryan, the kids are screaming." I leapt out of bed, my heart pounding. I rushed to their room, where Robbie was crying uncontrollably, and Sam was huddled under the covers, shaking. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside them. Robbie managed to choke out between sobs. "There was someone outside the window." Flash came from his window again. My blood ran cold. "Did you see who it was?" Robbie shook his head. "No, it was too dark." I took the kids upstairs to our room, letting them sleep with us for comfort. Carol and I lay in bed, both on edge. I peeked out the window towards Steve's house, now eerily dark. I saw him, Steve, standing in one of the upstairs windows, watching us. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but his eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. My anger flared, and I stormed outside. I banged on Steve's door repeatedly, but he didn't answer. I tried calling the police, reporting the incident, but it seemed they couldn't do much without solid evidence. For days, Steve avoided any contact. I would see him peeking through the curtains when I was outside, but he never came out. It was clear he was avoiding me deliberately. Carol and I decided enough was enough. We couldn't live like this, and the kids' safety was paramount. Within a month, we moved to a new house in a different town. The new place was a relief. Quiet, safe environment where the kids could play without fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I often found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Steve or some sign of him. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the new house, Sam asked, "Dad, is the man next door going to come here?" I froze. "Why do you ask that, Sam?" Sam shrugged, his face filled with innocent curiosity. He was always watching us. I thought maybe he would come here too. I hugged him tightly, trying to reassure him. "No, sweetheart. We're safe here. We won't have to worry about him anymore." Despite my reassurances, the lingering fear of the unknown never completely disappeared. I occasionally found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if the darkness would ever catch up with us. The old house was behind us. The shadow of that man, the Watcher, still loomed large in my mind. In the end, we had escaped one nightmare, but the echoes of that experience stayed with us. You ever find yourself in a situation where a neighbor's gaze feels too intense, where shadows seem to watch you from afar? Remember our story. Sometimes, it's better to move on before the darkness can follow you, because once it does, you may find that there's no escaping the Watcher. I was just 9 years old when the night that would haunt me for the rest of my life began. I remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me alone in the house, a rare occurrence. It was supposed to be a quiet night of video games and comfort, but it quickly turned into something far more sinister. I was upstairs in my room, completely absorbed in the pixelated world of Metroid Prime on my GameCube. My little room was a sanctuary of sorts, where I could lose myself in alien worlds and escape the mundanity of my everyday life. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the game console and the occasional creak of the floorboards. It was a peaceful, if slightly lonely setting. Suddenly, the house phone rang from downstairs. My mother had always insisted that I answer it if I was alone, just in case it was her calling. I sprinted down the stairs, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. By the time I reached the kitchen, the phone had rung 4 times. I picked it up, noting the caller ID displayed my mom's cell phone number. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual. "Sweetie, can you come outside and help with the groceries?" The voice on the other end was unmistakably my mother's, but something about it felt off, distant, almost mechanical. My heart skipped a beat. My mom never called me sweetie like that, especially not in such a robotic tone. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why do you sound like that?" "Like what, sweetie?" she replied, and the way she repeated that word made my skin crawl. I didn't know why, but something in me screamed that it wasn't her. I slammed the phone down, my mind racing. The phone rang again almost immediately. My mom's number flashed on the screen once more. I didn't answer. My fear mounted as I considered what was happening. The phone rang a 3rd time, but this time the number was different. Hesitant, I picked up. "Hey, James," a gravelly voice said. "I know this is going to sound weird, but it's your dad. I'm outside." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My dad had died when I was only 3 years old. I had no memories of him. "What?" I managed to croak out. "I'm outside," the voice insisted. I have a lot to explain. My heart pounded in my chest as I hung up. This was not my mom. This was not my dad. The ringing stopped, but my anxiety did not. Phone was silent for a moment, but then the knock came. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, the sound echoing through the empty house. I crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. There was no one to be seen. The knocks continued. I could hear a man's voice, muffled and eerie, calling out my name. "James, it's your dad." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. I knew I had to call 911. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency number. The operator's voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to my panic. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my house, I whispered urgently. They're trying to get in. The operator asked me a series of questions that I could barely answer. She instructed me to find a room with a lock and stay there until the police arrive. I bolted to the bathroom on the first floor, the only room with a lockable door. I turned off the lights and huddled in the corner, trying to keep my breathing quiet. I could hear the intruder trying each window and door, the sound of their frustrated grunts and muffled curses filling the house. It was clear there were at least two people involved, a man and a woman, their efforts coordinated and relentless. The minutes felt like hours as I waited in the darkness. I could hear the struggle intensify, the scraping of metal against wood as they tried to force their way in. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noises stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence. After what seemed like an eternity, the operator's voice crackled over the line, informing me that the police had arrived and it was safe to come out. I slowly opened the bathroom door and crept into the living room. The police were already at the front door, their presence a relief. They conducted a thorough investigation, inside and out. They asked me about my mom and whether she knew anyone who might want to hurt us. I told them she was supposed to be out grocery shopping and that I didn't know of anyone who might pose a threat. Their questions were probing, and their concern was evident. When my mom returned, she was frantic. She had brought my little sister with her, both of them bewildered by the sight of police cars parked outside our home. My mom's phone had been stolen, which explained how the intruders had obtained our number. The police confirmed that the phone was likely used to track us down, as it had a picture of our family as the background. This detail, though chilling, gave a clearer picture of their intent. My mom's reaction was a mix of relief and guilt. She vowed never to leave me alone again. The event changed everything. The house no longer felt like a safe haven, but rather a place filled with shadows and echoes of that night. My mom stayed close, never leaving me alone at night again until I was old enough to fend for myself. But the terror didn't end with that night. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar phone call, every shadow that danced on the walls of our house was a reminder of that evening. I would often lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of that voice calling my name. It was a reminder that danger could come from anywhere, even from the people who were supposed to protect us. Sarah and I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood on Long Island. It was one of those places where nothing exciting ever happened, which was perfect for us. We had rented a small house, cozy enough for the two of us, with a decent-sized backyard, shielded from the outside world by a tall wooden fence. The street was peaceful, tucked away from the main roads, with only a handful of houses around. To one side was a drainage basin surrounded by trees, and to the other side, our only visible neighbors, an older couple in their 60s, lived in silence. Across the street from us was a small patch of woods, which blocked the view of another drainage basin. It was the kind of place you might call idyllic, but there was something off from the start that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the isolation, the quiet that felt a little too quiet, or maybe it was the house behind ours. There was just one house that could see into our backyard over the fence. It stood slightly taller than ours, with a second-floor window overlooking our space. We didn't think much of it at first. After all, it's not unusual for houses to have windows facing each other. But as the days passed, Sarah and I started to feel watched. It began with the fall cleanup. I was out in the yard, raking leaves, when I noticed them for the first time. Two figures, a middle-aged man and woman, standing at the upstairs window of the house behind ours, staring. They were just standing there, their faces pressed against the glass, watching me as I worked. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. People are nosy sometimes, right? No harm in it. But they didn't stop. Every time I went out into the yard, there they were, standing at the same window, watching. Their eyes followed my every move. never blinking, never shifting. It was as if they had nothing better to do than stand there and stare. Sarah noticed it too. "They're always there," she said one night, glancing nervously at the window. "It's creepy. Why don't they ever leave?" I tried to reassure her, but I was just as creeped out. We pretended not to notice for as long as we could, but eventually it got to the point where Sarah refused to go into the backyard. She was too uncomfortable with those people watching us. Their presence felt invasive, almost sinister. One foggy afternoon, I decided to test something. While I was out raking, I looked up at the window and waved at them, trying to be friendly. They didn't wave back. They didn't even flinch. They just stood there, eyes locked on me, their expressions blank, almost lifeless. It sent a chill down my spine. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. "We should go introduce ourselves," Sarah suggested one evening after dinner. "Maybe if we meet them, it won't feel so weird." I didn't like the idea, but Sarah was persistent. We walked around the block to their house and rang the doorbell. After a long, tense wait, the door creaked open just a crack. A young man, probably in his 20s, peered out at us. His face was half hidden behind the door, and the house behind him was dark. Eerily dark. "Hi," Sarah said, trying to sound cheerful despite the unsettling atmosphere. "We live behind you. We just wanted to introduce ourselves." The man didn't smile. He barely even acknowledged us. "What do you want?" His voice was cold, almost robotic. "We've noticed two people at the window a lot," I said, glancing at the upstairs window where the watchers always stood. "A man and a woman. We just wanted to say hello, maybe get to know our neighbors." The man's expression didn't change. "There's no one else here," he said flatly. Sarah and I exchanged uneasy glances. "But we've seen them. They're always at the window." "I don't know who you're talking about," the man said, his voice tinged with annoyance. Then, without another word, he shut the door in our faces. As we walked back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The man's reaction, the darkness of the house, the strange, unsettling energy, it all felt off. That night, I went upstairs to our bedroom, which had a window facing that same house. I peeked out, and there they were again, the man and woman, standing at the window, staring. This time, though, it was worse. Even from this distance, I could tell they weren't just looking out the window. They were looking directly at me. I shut the blinds, heart racing, and went downstairs to tell Sarah. "We're planting trees," I said. "First thing next spring. I don't care how much it costs, we need to block that window." The next few days, we tried to avoid looking outside. We avoided the backyard altogether. But one night, around 11 p.m., we heard a strange knocking sound. It wasn't coming from the front door or even the side door. It was coming from the backyard. "Wait," I told Sarah, trying to sound braver than I felt. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a baseball bat, and headed downstairs. The knocking grew louder as I approached the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the sound wasn't just random tapping. It was deliberate, insistent. Someone was knocking on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds were drawn, and I had no intention of opening them. Instead, I turned on the backyard light, hoping to scare off whoever or whatever was out there. The knocking stopped instantly. I stood there, frozen, listening to the silence. I didn't dare look out the window. My mind was racing with thoughts of those figures at the window, and now I was terrified they were somehow in the yard. I went back upstairs and told Sarah everything was fine, that I had scared whoever it was away. But the truth was, I hadn't seen anyone. I didn't know who or what had been out there. For the next 2 weeks, things were quiet. Figures at the window seemed to disappear, and we started to feel a little more comfortable. But then, late one night, we were woken by the sound of yelling. It was coming from the house behind ours. I opened our bedroom window and listened. The screams were muffled but loud, like someone was in a lot of pain. The yelling continued for a few minutes, and then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We debated calling the police, but in the end, we didn't. Something about that house made me hesitate, as if involving the authorities would make things worse. The next morning, I checked the window again. The house was as still and quiet as ever. No sign of movement, no sign of life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in that house. And then, a few nights later, it happened again. We were asleep when I heard a loud thud from the backyard. I bolted upright, my heart racing, and looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I nudged Sarah awake and we both listened in the dark. There it was again, a thud followed by scraping like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I grabbed the baseball bat and crept downstairs. The backyard light was still on, but the yard itself was empty. The noise, however, continued, coming from behind the fence, from the house where those figures had been watching us. I stood at the window, staring into the darkness, my breath fogging up the glass. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. Figure. A man, standing in the shadows near the fence, staring at our house. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was one of the people from the window. He stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. And then slowly he raised his hand and waved. I backed away from the window, my blood turning to ice. I ran upstairs, grabbed Sarah, and we left the house that night, not bothering to pack anything. We never went back. A few days later, I checked the local news. There was a report of a body found in the drainage basin behind the houses. They didn't give any details, but I knew, somehow, I knew it was connected to the house behind ours. We moved far away after that to a place where the neighbors don't watch from their windows, and there are no dark houses lurking behind ours. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up and wonder if they're still watching. And if one day, they'll find us again.